What happens when a dictatorship becomes too oppressive? In Romania, the citizens revolted, leading to a period of unrest known as the Christmas Revolution. But what led to this horrific execution? Join us in exploring the Romanian Revolution, the rise and fall of Nicolae Ceausescu, and the events leading to his execution. The Romanian Revolution, known as the Christmas Revolution, was a period of unrest that swept across Romania and resulted in the trial and execution of longtime Communist Party General Secretary Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Elena. Ceausescu had been a dictator in Romania for 42 years before he was overthrown and executed, marking the end of Marxist-Leninist government in the Warsaw Pact country. The revolution claimed the lives of approximately 1,000 people, with thousands more being injured. Ceausescu's rise to power began with his involvement in the Romanian Communist youth movement and led to his becoming the leader of the Romanian Communist Party. After gaining popular support for his nationalistic beliefs and openly challenging Soviet Union dominance over Romania, he became head of state. He ended Romania's involvement in the Warsaw Pact alliance and condemned the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the invasion of Czechoslovakia by Warsaw Pact forces. However, after becoming president in 1974, his regime became oppressive, with limited free speech and torture of dissidents. They also outlawed contraception and abortion, causing a rise in maternal mortality rates. In 1982, due to Romania's heavy foreign debt, he exported the country's agriculture and industry, causing extreme poverty and shortages. He also appointed family members to positions of power in the government. Elena Ceausescu initially worked as a secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but her role became significant after her husband became the General Secretary of the Communist Party. She accompanied her husband on state visits and eventually rose to become the second most important person in the Communist Party, deeply involved in politics. A cult of personality emerged around the Ceausescus, with Elena regarded as the mother of the nation. In March 1980, she became the first deputy prime minister. However, rising tensions in Romania led to protests in December 1989, sparked by the government's attempt to evict a Hungarian pastor. The crowd initially chanted anti-communist slogans, but the protests quickly turned violent as some protesters attempted to burn down buildings. The police and security forces responded with tear gas and water cannons, leading to arrests and confrontations. The next day, the protests resumed and rioters broke into district committee buildings, throwing propaganda brochures and Ceausescu's writings out of the windows. The military was called in, but chaos erupted with gunfire and fights. Tanks were eventually sent in, leading to wild shooting and helicopters overhead. Some areas resembled war zones with blood on the streets. While Ceausescu was on a visit to Iran, his wife and subordinates were tasked with suppressing the revolt. Martial law was declared and a curfew imposed, but a group of 30 men defied this by waving a Romanian flag with the communist coat of arms removed. They were fired upon, and some were killed while others were injured. Elena sent other officials to handle the situation, and most of the arrested protesters were released. However, when Ceausescu returned, he gave a televised speech expressing his anger for the revolution. Despite efforts to drown out the protesters, the crowd began to jeer and chaos broke out, leading to revolution. During a nationwide broadcast, the speech caused panic as Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife were rushed back inside the building. The crowd transformed into a riot, demanding the dictator's downfall. As more people joined the protest, anti-terrorist squads were deployed and began attacking the crowd with deadly force. Despite martial law, hundreds of thousands of people gathered in central Bucharest. After the Minister of Defense died under suspicious circumstances, his replacement refused to fire on the demonstrators, which played a key role in the overthrow of the government. Victor Stanculescu later said he had a choice between execution by either Ceausescu or the revolutionaries. Afterward, Nicolae and Elena made their way to the roof of the building and were airlifted off. However, protesters infiltrated the building, overpowered the bodyguards, and made their way to the balcony, only meters away from Ceausescu. The lift's power failed before it reached the top, so the president's personal pilot was instructed to rescue them, but landing where he intended became impossible. Eventually, the co-pilot informed him that the demonstrators were approaching the terrace. At that moment, Ceausescu and his wife were carried out by their bodyguards, appearing to be on the brink of fainting from terror. Mania Mănescu and Emil Babu followed closely behind, and a security officer scrambled to the back seats with them. As they tried to board the helicopter, Ceausescu was pulled in and protesters were seen running across the terrace, leaving very little space. Francisco, Elena, and I managed to squeeze in between the chairs and the doors, even though the helicopter was designed to only carry 4 passengers and we were 6. When they arrived, the unit commander informed them that a revolution had taken place and wished them luck, leaving Matulan, the pilot, unable to do anything more. The ordeal for Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu began when their security detail attempted to flag down a car for their escape. They were initially picked up by a doctor who was unwilling to assist and feigned car trouble, leading them to be picked up by another driver. However, their attempts at escape were thwarted when they were arrested by local police and taken to a garrison military compound where they were held captive until their trial. The trial itself was brief, lasting around an hour, during which they were accused of genocide with over 60,000 victims. The Ceausescus defended themselves against the charges, which included organizing armed action against the people, offensive destruction of public property, undermining the national economy, and attempting to flee Romania using over $1 billion deposited in foreign banks. The trial was deemed to be a show trial as they were convicted of all charges and sentenced to death, without the opportunity to choose their own lawyers. Despite Nicolae questioning the authenticity of the courts, the Ceausescus were executed for their crimes, marking a violent and bloody end to the Romanian dictatorship. Just days after the revolution began, the Ceausescus were executed at 4 p.m. on Christmas Day, 1989, on a military base outside of Bucharest. Their execution was carried out by a firing squad comprised of paratroop soldiers, with hundreds reportedly volunteering to take the lives of the dictator and his wife. Nicolae Ceausescu once stated that their masquerade was unnecessary, as they could have been shot without it. 4 soldiers bound the Ceausescu's hands before their execution, during which Elena screamed insults at the soldiers as she was lined up against a wall outside the barrack building. While this was happening, Nicolae sang "The International." The firing squad then quickly began firing at the couple against the wall. The execution was hastily arranged, and the soldiers were too trigger-happy for the TV crew present to capture the full event. The TV crew only managed to capture the last rounds of shots fired. A retired captain later claimed that he believed his shots were responsible for killing the Ceausescus, as he was the only one of the 3 assigned soldiers who remembered to switch his Kalashnikov rifle to fire fully automatic. One of the soldiers hesitated as he fired, causing some delay. In 1990, it was discovered that around 120 bullets were lodged in Elena and Nicolae's bodies. The execution was carried out quickly out of fear that loyalists might attempt to rescue them. Following the execution, their bodies were covered with canvas, flown to Bucharest, and buried in a cemetery. The Ceausescus were the last people to be executed in Romania before the abolition of capital punishment on January 7, 1990. Their deaths marked the violent end of their decades of power over Romania. The story of the Romanian Revolution and the execution of Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu is one of the most dramatic and horrific events of the 20th century. It serves as a reminder of the dangers of authoritarianism and the importance of democracy and human rights. The legacy of the Ceausescu regime still haunts Romania to this day, but the revolution also brought about significant change and progress in the country. The events of December 1989 demonstrated the power of the people to rise up against oppression and demand freedom. As we reflect on this momentous event, let us remember the courage and sacrifice of those who fought for their rights and stood up against tyranny. May their legacy inspire us to continue fighting for democracy and human rights, and to never forget the lessons of history. Thank you for watching, and we hope this video has shed some light on this fascinating and tragic story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. And as always, stay curious and keep learning.